Welcome back to another edition of the Founder Spotlight here at Herbal Profiles. Today, I have a guest that is one of my good friends. We met on LinkedIn. His name is David Gonzalez. He's the founder of Fizzy THC. Welcome, David. How are you today?
Lars, thanks for having me. Great to be back.
Absolutely. So you've made quite the leap from tech and startups to founding Fizzy THC and being in the cannabis space. So what was that pivotal moment that made you say, I'm gonna go do my own thing here?
Sure. Leave my day job, so to speak. Yeah, it's a great question. So for me, the background that I had, so a lot of it was around e-commerce, logistics, software, and I was actually one of the segments that we started working on at the last company I was at is called Return Logic. So I was doing reverse logistics for brands, but for whatever reason, we started working with a ton of cannabis brands, and they were on Shopify. And so I was kind of thinking to myself, how on earth are cannabis companies selling products on Shopify and doing interstate commerce? And that's what really got me down the wormhole of the Farm Bill, cannabis beverages, the hemp industry, etc. And for me, I was in product marketing, growth marketing at the time, and there's no better way to understand your end user, your customer, than to do what they do. And so I whipped together a kind of a fake Shopify site just to see what it would be like to operate as a cannabis retailer or an online retailer. And while that was all happening, that actually just coincided perfectly with what was going on with Minnesota's legislations. I'm born and raised from Minnesota, live there now. And in 2022, when they inadvertently passed that legislation that allowed for sale of gummies, drinks, manufacturing low-dose THC products, was happening at the exact same time that I was launching this kind of Shopify store. And so I just kind of noticed those two dots that needed to be connected. And so the last kind of element that helped me break into the market was a very good friend of mine still has a nutraceuticals manufacturing company. So makes vitamins, supplements, powders, you name it. And we were basically seeing all these beverages come out, and we just thought to ourselves, like, man, wouldn't it be great to just be able to make our own wherever, instead of having to have a seltzer, or there's some places where those drinks weren't prevalent yet. It turns out we could. And so we came up with the idea of Fizzy THC tablets, and it was just the perfect product to launch D2C as well. It's not a drink or water in a can. It's a lightweight, super, wow, look at you, plugged it even. You got it. It's a lightweight product. You don't have to worry about the shipping costs, things blowing up in transit. And so we basically got to ride this wave of hemp drinks, hemp beverages, but having a different enough product and one that's really geared and designed for. So yeah, over the past 2 years now, really got to a point where I was getting, I'll say busy, but really just obsessed with the hemp space. And it got to the point where I was like, it is difficult for me to focus on my day job and doing reverse logistics and working with all these companies when there's such an opportunity right here in front of me. So I forget the exact date. I think it was the summer of June 22 or 23. That's when I decided to, I'll say, quit my day job, so to speak, and go all in on starting a company.
That's awesome. You mentioned you're born and raised from Minnesota. Obviously, that's become kind of the mecca of the THC beverage world. So what's an insight or a trend from 2024 that you think will shape the future of the industry?
Yeah, I think what I am very encouraged by is there's now a blueprint that says this model, this paradigm works, and there's verifiable proof of that. There's a whole marketplace, and granted, it's still burgeoning, but you have thousands of operators, thousands of store, thousands of jobs, millions in revenue and tax revenue. And so what I'm excited by and what I see happening is there are now other states that are looking at this and saying, how do we replicate what's going on in Minnesota? And I think what stands out to me is they are looking to connect and talk to people who are operators in that space to learn what worked, what didn't work, we improve. And my hope is that what we see is basically more copycats, more states that say that model works, we want to adopt that. And my hope is that it becomes a domino effect. And so legislatively, I guess what I'm hoping on a macro level people learn is what works here, what can they apply to their own state? And then on a product level, I think what also is very important too, more of a polarizing topic, if you will, and something that'll be very interesting to see how this market evolves, is the dosage caps and the types of products that are able to be sold here. So one of the unique elements about Minnesota today, no smokable hemp-derived products. On top of that, there are also dosage caps, so 5 milligrams per serving, 10 milligrams per container on the drink side, 50 milligrams per container on the edible side. So the reason why that makes this question very interesting is other states have to grapple with what types of products should we be selling? Should we have Delta 9, Delta 8 carts? Should we have high potency products that are 200 milligrams, whatever? And really there's no answer. But what I think will be very interesting is to see how states in the future start to look at Minnesota, adapt their own policies, and then figure out what kind of products we want our citizens, patrons to be able to partake in. And then I'll say the last thing that's going to be very interesting on the future of Minnesota's marketplace is Minnesota is one of the only markets to date, I'll call it, they kind of did an inverted positioning, meaning they started off with this low dose market that really took off and captured a lot of consumers. How is that market going to be impacted by recreational cannabis when that comes online? Because it's slated to start by next year. And right now, there's no precedent, really. We don't know. Minnesota was very unique with its legislation, and now it has the opportunity to tack on a recreational market. And it'll be very interesting to see how those dynamics kind of shake out over the next few years.
Yeah, so I'm desperately hoping that Florida can adopt some similar laws.
Sure.
I'm not overly hopeful, but possibly. And then you mentioned how does it the rec industry coming in affect the low dose, but you and I have had conversations about this. I don't really think the average consumer that wants to go into a dispensary and buy a lot of the regulated products that tend to be more higher dose products, and the low dose consumer are the same customers. So ultimately in Minnesota, we'll see how it plays out. But I think there's two different consumer segments there.
Yeah, it's two totally different markets. Not totally different. There is some overlap, but I think it's really important to remember that there's a lot of animosity because, for example, recreational cannabis looks at dollar share. They think that $1 to the hemp industry is $1 out of their pocket. Reality is it's $1 you have never gotten because that shopper would have never stepped foot into a recreational dispensary. That's not really the target market. And so to your point, I think I've said this a million times, but a proliferation of markets in Minnesota, you'll have your high dose and your low dose market. Your high dose will be specifically geared towards your higher potency products. It'll just be for recreational dispensaries. That'll be your flower, your carts, your whatever high potency product. And then on a mass scale, you'll see low dose products where they are today and more. I think that's a good thing because it opens up a larger total addressable market. There's more people trying cannabis products. It's also an on-ramp. A lot of people who are trying these products might say, yeah, it wasn't so bad. Maybe I will try something stronger. And there is a healthy amount of people who operate in both. There's also this new phenomena, I'll say as well, or maybe a new archetype of customer that exists. The person who has historically been a recreational user, who's getting older, their priorities are shifting. I fall under this category. I used to be an avid recreational user, and it's been probably a couple of years now since I've actually had a product that would be classified as recreational because I don't need to be inebriated, cross-eyed. I just want to relax before bed. And so I think a big catalyst for that was I became a parent. And so I think that's going to hold weight for a lot of people who are getting older, whose priorities are going to change. And I don't want to be cross-eyed around my child. And even prior to that, I didn't want to be worrying about being too cross-eyed if I had to drive my wife to delivery. And so these products allow you to unwind, relax, and it's not something that is overly potent. And that's really the behavior that gets pushed at recreational dispensaries. It's the higher the percentage of THC, the higher the margin, the higher the product. That's what they're incentivized to push, and it makes sense. Now we're seeing this kind of pendulum swing back the other way, where people are saying, well, I can have my low dose THC, I can have some minor cannabinoids, some other functional ingredients, and I can engineer how I want to feel and still function. So I love that the word function and functional is starting to pop up everywhere and be a real buzzword in the THC and I'll call it minor cannabinoid hemp market.
I love that you said functional, and I'll continue to go off script here a little bit. But,
Sure.
For example, this past weekend, I went for a long run, and beforehand, I took a gummy that had cordyceps, lion's mane, CBG, as well as 5 milligrams of THC, and it was a great run. I got
Yard.
a little, it was not a PR,
Yeah.
but I'm just getting back into running after taking a couple months off. But it was a PR in terms of distance, just not
Sure.
average time. But anyway, I got a little deep in my thoughts. I always take the gummies, or I drink off field sometimes before a run, and it's always about that mile and a half into the run. You obviously start to get a little bit of the natural runner's high, but then it leans right into the actual high, and you just kind of get in the zone and
Yeah, it's
run.
it's a good way to put it. It's and I've even seen some ads for it at this point. Flow state in a can or flow state in a
Mhm.
gummy. It does a very good job of quieting your brain voice, and that's a very appealing thing to have. And that's why a lot of people take cannabis to begin with. It's either want to shut my brain off completely and relax, or it's want to unwind, de-stress at some level. And so, what's very encouraging with this low dose market is the integration of everyday life. And
Yep.
so, like one of the most common questions I get, and I don't really have a best answer for, is when do I have a THC energy drink? Is it in the morning when I wake up? Is it the middle of the day for coffee? Is it when I go out? Is it like a vodka Red Bull? The answer is all of them
Yep.
if you want. And that's really the point. It's these products are basically being designed now to keep that person awake, keep them moving, keep them relaxed, but at the same time, there's other ingredients that make you feel something. So there's that positive feedback loop, but it's not such a feedback loop where you are stuck in the couch. You can go out, be social, run, work out, do whatever. And so it's really flirting with this line of being almost like a supplement or even a CPG product. It's not quite there. I don't think it'll ever completely fit in there, but there is this kind of
Mhm.
integration happening where you might be able to get cannabinoid products at GNC sometime down the road. And so I think that's what I'm most encouraged by is that's still very early. Not a lot of people even connect those dots yet, but at the same time, it kind of shows you the direction for where this whole segment and market's headed. Mass adoption has to be a product or set of products that can substitute with what people take today and be something that you have daily that fits into your daily life. It needs to substitute for something. And that's what we're starting to see now. And so what's really interesting is that since we are still so early, it's like when you give a tech product to somebody, you have no idea how they're going to use your software when you make it. And it
Yep.
might work completely different than what you intended. And that's really what we're seeing now. People are taking these products at different times of the day, different use cases, different contexts, different types of products, different cannabinoids. And it's really the beginning of a very interesting experiment, which is what's going to be the future of the cannabis plant? Is it going to be using all these different kinds of cannabinoids for different effects, different outcomes? When, how, with who should you take these certain products, different ratios, different dosages? And we're seeing a lot of experimentation. And to me, that's really exciting because for a long time it was just take this super potent high THC cart, shove it in your face, have as much as possible, have it every day. It's like, no, maybe for some people, but I think it's really interesting how this new cascade of products coming out is very focused on outcomes, efficacy, function, etc. For sure.
Absolutely. So let's take it back to Fizzy THC for a second. So you mentioned
Perfect.
earlier that it's a little bit of a different form factor. It's
Mhm.
smaller, it's easier to ship, and things like that. And you've also talked a lot about the importance of differentiation and what's become a very crowded market. For Fizzy THC, what sets your guys' products apart, and how do you plan to keep innovating?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the form factor alone is a differentiator in and of itself. And
Hmm.
so by working in retail and selling a lot of THC drinks, I got to see a lot of the challenges that they had. And so the big challenges, and again, getting back to my logistics background, it was how do you ship heavy beverages and cans all across the country? And what are all the headaches and nuances that come with that? And it's not to knock it by any means. I have all the more respect for the operators in that who are doing that today because it is so challenging, but it really becomes an infrastructure game, meaning you need to have suppliers, manufacturers, co-packers, distributors, and retailers all across the country. Otherwise, the unit economics just don't work. And so for Fizzy, what we did was we looked at that and we said, do we really want to jump in and make another drink? Do we want to be competing with hundreds of other brands that are popping up all the time? Do we want to deal with that headache of figuring out infrastructure everywhere? Or is there something that's missing or a different lane that we could take to attack the market? And to be completely honest with Fizzy, it's always been more of a side project. It started off that way. we're making a Shopify store while I'm working at Return Logic, and then working at Hemp House selling all these drinks. But what's really been fascinating for me is now that I've had more time to focus on Fizzy, the value props make it even more lucrative for me.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that really stood out and why it has a big differentiator is there's still a lot of places where you cannot buy a THC beverage or have one. And so a big example of that is on premise, which I can't speak to national numbers, but in Minnesota, 4 out of every 5 sales that happen for liquor happen on premise, meaning a bar, a restaurant, a sporting event, a concert. So 80% of sales happen outside of retail stores. Right now for cannabis or for THC beverages, that's completely not the case. It is incredibly challenging to crack on premise. A few reasons. The biggest one is insurance. So if you sell these products, you got to take out a new policy. It's expensive. Some liquor insurance companies might threaten to drop you if you do sell those products. So there's a lot of barriers to entry. With Fizzy, looking ahead to the future, it was if the vast majority of dollars are going to happen on premise, how do I make it as easy as possible for people to have a THC beverage or make one through their menu? And so what do you do when you go and sit down at any restaurant? You have a water every single time, right? So if I have a product that you can bring with you, you can drop in your water, make your own drink, perfect. Same time, if I own a bar, or if I have a restaurant, whatever, I can then get creative and kind of make my own line or menu of products to satisfy that consumer as well. And so to answer your question, I did take a shortcut. I did have a business partner who just happened to have a tablet press, which in it of itself is rare. You have to register with the DEA. There's not a whole lot across the country. But B, we did have to come up with the technologies to basically create something, a tablet shape that you could drop in any drink, whether if it's carbonated, non-carbonated, whether if it's hot, cold, whatever, and basically create your own infusion. And so the reason we picked tablets specifically was that it was not a liquid. There are a lot of stick pack companies out there, and those value props work kind of similarly, but there's something about having that small tablet with you, having that kind of Alka-Seltzer vibe that made the product really appealing. And so what's really encouraging for me now is going back through reading reviews, hearing from customers who are saying, man, I went to a Vikings game and got to drop a Fizzy in my non-alcoholic beer and make my own beverage and relax and enjoy myself. That's the value prop and thing that we were looking to achieve that a traditional beverage brand would not have been and can't do. And so it gives us a nice moat, but at the same time, it's not. There are people who still love just cracking open a cold one, having their RTD, and I'm one of those people too. I have, my beverages. What do I have here? Had a North Canico one last night. It's really just one of those things where the product in and of itself, the unit economics work great because it's a lightweight product. I can ship everywhere. It's good for the consumer because they have autonomy over what kind of infused drink they want to have. And then it's really an access thing. You can have these things anywhere. I've had Fizzies on an airplane, had it on a Vikings game, a Wild game, had it at concerts. That's what's really exciting to me. It's exciting because I would not otherwise have that opportunity, and a lot of consumers share that sentiment. It really is a freedom thing as well.
Yeah. I am also a consumer of Fizzy THC. I've brought it with me to numerous bars and restaurants, and just like you said, I drop one into the water, order myself an innate beer, and then I just kind of go back and forth between the water and the beer.
Have you dropped it in your beer yet?
I've not dropped it into a beer yet.
Okay.
I've not done that yet. I have dropped it into I've talked about and just as well as the dilemma of not being able to get some of these drinks on premise being solved by some of these various products. I went to a concert last night, brought a few canned roadies with me, and was able to drink for free while still having fun because the bartenders like, oh, you want club soda and lemon juice? Sure, you can have that for free. So that, as well as Fizzy THC, you can do the same thing with water or club soda and still get the fun that your peers are having as well.
It's economical. There you go. Sure.
So, you mentioned working in retail, and you've worked with, over 100 different brands and seen firsthand, what works, what doesn't work. So what's a common mistake new brands make when they're entering into the THC beverage market?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for context, I was at Hemp House for the past year or so, and I think at one point we were selling 250 drinks. And one of the biggest challenges that I had as a retailer of these products because there were so many. So A, how do I choose what to even carry on my shelves? B, how the hell do I pitch all these different, like, is it a commoditized product where it's very similar? Are there different value props? And so really, to answer your question, what it forced me to do was sit there and talk to a lot of these brand founders, owners, etc., and just say, hey, tell me how you're different. Tell me how to sell this product. Who should I sell it to? And from there, that's where the magic started to happen. And I will say, we'll get to this later in the show, but it inspired a lot of thought around this is a young, small market that came online relatively soonish. And there's all these people that are flooding into one place in the supply chain, which is the brand side. And so to your question, what are the mistakes a lot of brands make? It's not even stopping to ask yourself, is that the right place to enter the market? And then B, should I? And so there's a lot of brands who hop in because it's easy to find a co-packer. It's easy to spend, 20, 50 grand, whatever it is, to launch your first batch of product, come up with a website. It's not a necessarily capital intensive thing to do. And it is this new, sexy, shiny industry. And so my big question or big thing that I see a lot of people do is just say, I'm going to launch a brand. I'm going to launch a brand. My advice would be to pause, think, come up, first study the marketplace, and then figure out how are you going to attack it differently than all these other people. And so an analogy I'll give is kind of similar to Fizzy as well, as if you have all these people rushing to mine gold, all these people hammering away, trying to get as much gold as they can, do you want to be the person who's sitting to the next guy, hitting as hard as you can, or do you want to make the shovels that help people do that? And so on the brand side, people don't fundamentally understand the unit economics and how challenging it is to actually win this marketplace. So since it is still early, there are people flooded to it, and that's just how all emerging markets work. There's an opportunity there, but it's asking yourselves, do you have relationships with suppliers? Do you have good negotiated terms? Do you have relationships with co-packers, manufacturers? What's the lead time for the amount of cans you have to order? How is your product different? Do you have a certain cannabinoid profile? Is it flavors? Is it, the type it is? Is it a seltzer, a soda? Is it a little shot? And then on top of that, can you actually get your product into people's hands? Can you land relationships with distributors? Do you know how to negotiate a distributor contract? Do you know how to work directly with a retailer? Do you know how to set up terms with retailers? Do you know how to help them sell? Do you know how to help both the distributor and the retailer sell your product? And then on top of that, can you set up a website? Do you know how to actually ship product all across the country? Do you know how expensive it is to ship product from Minnesota to New York to California? So a lot of variables that brands should stop and ask themselves and game it out. And really, it was a very simple exercise, but just having a pro forma for 3-year horizon would probably give a lot of people pause to stop and think, should I actually be doing this? And if you still have your edge and you say yes, go for it. But it requires a lot of focus, a lot of resources, capital, connections, and you are going to be competing against hundreds of other very smart, intelligent teams who have gone through this gauntlet to figure out what works, what doesn't, to just get where they are today. And those people are now partnering up and pushing this entire segment forward. So I don't mean for that to be doom and gloom. What you should learn is to be realistic about what you can expect to achieve. Don't just launch a brand and think that it's like a YouTube dropshipping course where you'll get rich quick. That's not what it is. It's very time, capital, resource intensive, and it takes a lot of ingenuity to get an edge. But if you can do it, the upside is definitely there. And so it's still, the good news is that it's still a very early market. There's still a lot to figure out. There are the Total Wines, the DoorDashes, whatever, that were big players that are looking at this and taking it seriously. But at the same time, it's still not in Walmart, still not in Target, still not on Amazon. There's still a long way to go before this market really evolves to what it can be. But if you are going to hop in today, just be realistic with yourself, ask yourself the right questions, and figure out how do you expect to compete against all these other people who've spent years basically laying the tracks, the foundation for this whole segment to really start to flourish.
That's great advice. Thank you for that. So you almost spilled the beans there, but
Sure.
let's go ahead and get into it here. So
Sure.
I have to ask you, there's a project that you're working on, and if I do say myself, it's someone pretty cool that you're partnering with on this project. And you haven't shared it publicly yet. So is there any
Sure.
news that you would like to break here today for herbal profiles.
Man, big spotlight. Yeah, I'd love to. So Lars, you and I have talked about this concept, this dilemma for probably close to 6-9 months now, which is there are so many brands, so many people, so many stories in this emerging market. There's a lot of people who see the potential of this market, who see what it can be, but being inundated, another new seltzer, another new soda, whatever the case may be. And there's really not a dedicated forum or outlet to have these real and raw conversations with brands, with operators, people in the supply chain for this THC beverage space. And so what started off as a conversation around how do we make Hemp House's website more alive and give people more of a background on a lot of these stories, I think what you and I have really come to realize is there needs to be a forum where people such as ourselves can connect with these brands and give them the opportunity to tell their story, tell people why they're different, how they intend to win the market, give people real advice on what it takes to actually enter this market, and then once you're in it, how do you survive? How do you win? And so instead of just making that a small SEO project to help get more website traffic, we figured why not just turn that into a podcast, a narrative, an opportunity for all these people in different parts of the supply chain to come talk about this category for the uninitiated, or the people who actually live and breathe in this stuff all day, every day. Because conversation you have with someone just starting versus someone who has been in this for 3-5 years, wildly different. But we wanted to make sure that wherever you are in your journey, that you had the opportunity to learn. And so, Lars, we have our Free Spirits podcast coming up, not to be confused with High Spirits, but Free Spirits is basically about the low dose THC beverage market, as well as other functional beverages that do not fall under that liquor category. And so you're right, pretty cool partner to have. Excited to dive in here. I'll be launching next month, but yeah, it's exciting times to have something fresh, have a brand new forum for a lot of these people to attend, learn from, etc. And couldn't do it with anybody better than Lars yourself.
I appreciate that. So what would you say you're most excited about in terms of these conversations that we're going to get to have with many founders, many people just doing various things throughout the supply chain, like you mentioned?
Yeah, one simple thing, practicality. There's a lot of conversations that are very high level. Tell us about your industry. Why is it awesome? Very different conversation to say, hey, you had a whole co-packer mess up 60,000 of your cans. How did you respond to that? And I think if we start to shine a light on both the glamorous but the not so glamorous pieces, there'll be a lot more constructive conversations and people will be able to learn a lot more. And I think also it's just better for the category if we collectively talk about not just the wins but the trials, the tribulations, come up with recipes, triages, playbooks, etc. That's going to be something that somebody can take away and then use for their business. If I say, hey, the THC marketplace is $100-200 million in Minnesota, great, like it's cool. But does that actually change how you do your business? Maybe, maybe not. And so I think the practicality and jumping into the weeds and going through specifics and understanding the actual supply chain process, the operational component of it, I think that's the piece that has less light shining on it. And that's what we intend to do, is go through and talk about what does it actually take to survive and win in this market, and what are all the juicy, nasty details that you have to be considering.
Yeah, the operational details, I think, would be very enlightening for a lot of people inside and outside the industry. And exactly what you said in terms of, I would love to have a success story come from someone, a listener, to write us in and say, hey, I was struggling with X, Y, and Z situation. And, I was listening to your guest talk about how they handled a similar situation, and we were able to come out the other side and become profitable. Or someone say, hey, I was thinking about starting a brand, listened to the show, got some great advice, and we've successfully launched and done our first $50,000 month or something like that.
Great.
That'll be very exciting. Hopefully we can have those success stories come out soon.
Absolutely. Well, I think the part that's exciting for me is a lot of the guests that we'll be speaking to are people who have already found that success for this stage of this marketplace. And so I think what I'll add is what I'm also excited about is by talking to those people and reflecting back years from now and seeing what problems they have at this stage, and then seeing where they will get to and how big they'll be and how different it'll be, I think will be very fascinating. It's almost like a was it a time capsule? Is that what those people have?
Yeah.
So very excited to see, since this is so early, how these brands, people we have conversations with, truly evolve and scale over time as well.
Yeah. So lastly, I'll end it here. How can my subscribers support you today?
It's a great question. Give me a follow on LinkedIn. Be David Gonzalez Cameron. Otherwise, check out fizzythc.com. Try out some tablets, grab some mints, try some gummies, all that stuff. Otherwise, next month, tune in for our first edition of the Free Spirits podcast, and excited to start to grow an audience together.
Well, thank you very much, David. And until next time, cheers.
All right, man. Take care. We'll see you.